Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Brennan, welcoming you to another edition of Honolulu on the Move, the show that brings you the latest news and information about the Honolulu Rail Transit Project. Today, we have with us a very special guest who's visiting the islands from Victoria, British Columbia, and he's a internationally recognized expert in the field of public transportation who has studied and written extensively about public transportation around the world. I'm happy to welcome today to Honolulu on the Move Mr. Todd Littman of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute, the VTPI, as we know. Welcome, Todd. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Bill.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that goes on at VTPI.
Well, most of my work is looking at at ways to apply more comprehensive evaluation to transport decision making. So, for example, we're looking at how to incorporate things like health objectives, affordability, land use impacts, basic mobility for non-drivers, other planning objectives that are often overlooked in conventional transportation planning and that are becoming increasingly important to transportation system users.
You know, we are underway here to try to build a 20-mile rail transit system, elevated rail transit system, to improve our public transportation, which now consists solely of a bus system that's well used, and we have a pretty high per capita transit ridership here in Honolulu. And I know you've looked at and evaluated some of the benefits of rail in certain cities and around the United States. What kind of conclusion do you come to in that evaluation of the benefits of rail?
Right. Well, let me clarify
Sure.
that what I emphasize is the importance of high quality public transportation. So it matters less what type of wheels it operates on than performance factors like speed, comfort, and therefore not being too crowded and having good air conditioning and things like that.
Right.
The integration of the transit system with other transportation system components. So, is it easy to walk to? Is it easy to bike to? Is there bike storage at the bus stops or the train stations? Is it easy to pay for? To pay a fare? Is it easy to obtain information? These are all facets that affect the quality of the public transit system. And so generally, rail has much higher quality. But I emphasize that because the rail itself is only a part of it. For example, regardless of whether or not you have a rail system, I think there's a very good justification for having bus lanes and transit-oriented development along bus routes, because those are, even if you have the rail, you still need that for trips that aren't on the rail line. And so what we really need to think about is raising the quality of transportation options throughout the city. Now, what my research does indicate is that rail can be a very strong catalyst for this, because it does start attracting the discretionary traveler, that is the person that owns a car. And if you have high quality rail, they see a reason to invest in the transit system and to start using the transit system. And so one of the interesting research findings from my work is that cities with high quality rail also tend to have higher quality bus service, more bus service per capita and more bus ridership per capita than cities that don't have rail.
Right.
So the rail becomes a catalyst for a whole cascade of transportation system improvements. Now, it's a complicated set of factors, and so one of the questions that I think you're going to need to ask is how well your rail planning is integrating with your bus planning, with your walking and cycling improvements, with your land use development policies, and this whole other set of of strategies and policies that are actually going to maximize the value from your rail transit investments.
Right. And I should point out that we are looking at how best to integrate the bus system with the rail system so that we have kind of a seamless and integrated and coordinated public transportation that is a combination of both rail and bus, and not rail versus bus or that kind of thing. You know, we hear a lot pro and con about rail, and I know that when I've heard you speak earlier, as you had come to a symposium here on rail several years ago, that you know, sometimes bus is better, sometimes rail is better, depends, this, that, and the other. But there are several areas, congestion, environmental, where you have pointed out some benefits that rail has over bus. Does rail help reduce congestion?
Well, yes. Let me explain my position, which is when it comes to the great debates between rail and bus, I'm agnostic.
Yes.
My research, as I mentioned, indicates that it's the quality of public transportation service in general that affects the overall benefits of the system. So it doesn't matter whether it's bus or rail, if it's relatively fast, comfortable, convenient, integrated, you're going to get, and so attracts discretionary travelers. It attracts people out of their cars, especially on those major urban corridors. Now, there are some inherent advantages of rail. One is that the current technology diesel buses tend to be noisy and relatively high air pollution, polluting, and a lot of that is and the worst of that is the particulates,
yes.
The small soot particles that are particularly unhealthy. So one of the things that we find is that if you have a corridor that's carrying tens of thousands of passengers by bus, you're probably not going to have the intense type of building development around the bus stations as you would get around train stations, just because of the noise and the soot,
yes,
and the air pollution. Now, there is progress in diesel bus technology, and it's possible that that impact is going to decline, but at least for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 10 years, or maybe even 20 years, we don't have the type of diesel buses that somebody's going to want to live near. Now, with rail, electric driven rail, you can actually make the stations, the train stations, a multi-use building. It's very common that in the basement or the first floor of an office building, you have a train station, and so you have much more integrated, what we call, the transit-oriented development with mixed use.
Yes.
So, and that makes it much more convenient. You go to your train stops and you walk right into an office building or a university campus or a shopping mall or an arena or whatever it is that you're developing around that station. So that's one of the benefits. Another benefit is that the capacity, the potential capacity of a train tends to be much larger than bus. So once you start exceeding about 30,000 peak period passengers, it is very difficult to operate bus lines, bus rapid transit of any sort beyond that. There are some systems that have up to 30,000, but they need passing lanes. They have some of the buses are express buses, and so the size of the right-of-way, the amount of space you need for a 30,000 passenger BRT is much larger than what's needed for trains. So there are a number of potential benefits. The way it shows up is that the discretionary travelers, the people that own a car, tend to be much more likely to use rail, and rail is much more likely to become a catalyst for transit-oriented development. On the other hand, I'm not in any way saying that rail is superior in every place. I think that there are a few corridors in most cities where rail is justified on the capacity and the station development grounds. But it's really important to give equal attention to improving the bus service. And so you're really thinking of an integrated transit system where you're improving the quality of all of the modes.
Right. At the start of the show, we talked a little bit about some more recent topics that you're looking into, including affordability of transportation and some of the health benefits, as obesity and lack of activity seems to be more and more reported on and studied, and the results aren't all that promising or healthy for a lot of us. Can you comment on what you're looking at and what you're hoping to find or finding?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to flip that around. I'm going to say, yes, there are significant problems with our current transportation system, but actually the research is identifying some really effective solutions. So I like to think that we have some opportunities here.
Yes.
Okay, so what my research indicates is that the cities that have developed high quality public transit systems, and usually that means it's organized around rail, and then you have the high quality bus service that's a feeder. Where you do that, those cities have significantly lower per capita traffic fatality rates, significantly higher transit ridership, significantly lower per capita vehicle ownership, and significantly lower per capita vehicle travel. So, for example, if you compare, I do matched pair analysis, so I find two cities that are of comparable age and comparable geography and comparable size, and one of them has rail transit and the other doesn't. So, for example, if you compare, say, Chicago with Dallas, Texas, or something like that, we consistently find that region-wide, not just in the city center, but region-wide, the cities that have the strong rail transit systems, or you could say the high-quality transit systems, residents drive 20% less, they're riding public transit 2 or 3 times more, and their vehicle ownership rates also go down. So, what does this mean? It means that the typical household in an automobile-dependent community owns 1 car per adult. Virtually everybody who's a driver is expected to own a car, and they're driving for almost all their trips. Even if your household is, say, half a mile from your children's school, parents are still driving their children to school because the land use pattern, the development pattern, and people's travel habits are so automobile dependent that they don't feel safe allowing their children to drive to walk to school. Similar, and now that same household, if you lived in the transit-oriented community, it would be normal for your children to walk to school. When you're running errands, you walk to local shops, or if you do drive, it's a very short trip. And so it's very likely your household's going to go from owning 3 or 2 cars to 2 or 1 car. You're shedding cars. And that's where you get very significant financial savings. In addition, there's very significant reductions in traffic fatality rates. So the more automobile-dependent communities have 20 to 40% higher traffic fatality rates as demographically equal communities that are more multimodal. And the households are spending less on vehicles and fuel, which also means that the regional economy benefits from spending less money to import fuel.
Right.
So what this suggests is that if it's done right, the transit-oriented development can be a catalyst to provide a number of changes in household expenditures, in the amount that people drive, and the results are very significant. We're finding the portion of people who are achieving the 22 minutes a day of moderate physical activity that the Surgeon General recommends is much higher in the walkable, transit-oriented communities. And for economically and physically disadvantaged people, that is, if you're in a wheelchair or you're low income, if you're a service worker, you are far, far better off in a community, in a multimodal community, because for those people who can't drive or can't afford to own a car, they are very much disadvantaged in an automobile-dependent community, and very much advantaged if you live in a community that's walkable and bikeable and has services nearby,
Right.
and that you can use public transportation conveniently.
I know here there are studies that in Honolulu we have cost of vehicle ownership runs about $11,000 plus a year. It's expensive, and as you say, if you could shed a car, I like that saying, shed a car or two, that's a lot of money to be saved by individuals here in the island.
Right. Here's one way to think of it. In an automobile-dependent community, the average household is spending about 20% or 22%, between 20 and 22% of its household income on transportation. In a multimodal community, a community with good walking, cycling, public transit, the average household is spending between 10 and 15%. So per capita household expenditures on transportation, that's total transportation, that's your bus fares, your vehicle ownership, your fuel, vehicle operation, insurance, all of those are much lower in the transit-oriented communities. It's a huge savings or a huge opportunity. And there's an interesting aspect of this that I think a lot of people might appreciate. And that is, let's say your household is making a choice between living in the automobile-dependent community where your house prices are somewhat lower,
right,
but your transportation costs are somewhat higher. So you would either spend, let's say, $15,000 on transportation and $10,000 on rent in the automobile-dependent community, and in the transit-oriented community, you'd spend $10,000 on transportation and $15,000 on rent. Well, not on rent, on mortgage.
Right.
Okay. Now here's the interesting thing: after 10 years, from in the short term, it's a wash. You say, well, we're spending $25,000 a year on transportation and housing combined.
Right.
But if you're spending more on housing, you're accruing more equity. So at the end of a decade, you are $100,000 wealthier. When you sell that house, you've accrued $100,000 that you didn't accrue if you had spent less on housing and more on transportation.
Interesting.
And so from the household wealth generation perspective, transit-oriented development with lower transportation costs, where you're saving on transportation costs, is a benefit even if a good portion of that additional transportation costs is spent on buying houses.
Right.
So these savings are very significant. Now, from Hawaii's perspective, your state economy, it's also very good that you're spending less money on petroleum because that's all imported from other places. And so your economy, if let's say you're running a restaurant, you own a restaurant.
I'd love to.
Yes, or a clothing store or something like that.
Yes.
You are better off if your city is investing in transportation options that reduce the amount of money that the households have to spend on vehicles and fuel, because then they have more money to spend on your goods.
Yes.
And that means And because fuel generates fewer jobs in Hawaii per $1 million spent than most other goods, if we can help households reduce what they have to spend on fuel, and they've got more money to spend on food, on clothing, on housing, on education, that's money that stays in your regional economy.
Right.
And generates more jobs and more business activity. So from a strategic economic development perspective, efficient transportation that reduces the amount of money that households have to spend on vehicles and fuel is actually very beneficial.
And you're talking more than just the cost per gallon of gasoline, which I think as consumers or users or motorists is the thing that we're closest to. We see it on the sign, we see how little we get or how much it takes to fill our tank. And here in Hawaii, we do have some of the highest gasoline prices in the nation. But to hear you talk, it's while that is a maybe significant component, it's just one component of the economics of good public transportation and transportation generally speaking.
In fact, it's a relatively small component. Yes, it's true. Hawaii has the highest fuel prices in the United States, but your household fuel costs are the fuel price times the amount of the number of gallons you buy, or basically the amount. Well, so I certainly support households taking steps to reduce their fuel consumption, for example, by buying a fuel-efficient car.
Right.
But fuel is only about 25% of the total costs of owning and operating a vehicle. So even if you reduce fuel costs by, say, 20%, that's only about a 6% reduction in total transportation costs. To achieve true affordability, to achieve true transportation costs, your transportation system needs to reduce the amount that you need to drive, so you're driving fewer annual kilometers or miles, and even more importantly, reduce the number of vehicles that you have to own. Now, wealthy people, they're perfectly happy owning 2 or 3 cars. But if you're a working class family and your budget is tight, the ability to shed a car, to reduce the number of cars that your household has to own, provides huge savings. For example, if you have, let's say, young adults in your household, if you're in an automobile-dependent community, in order for your children to go to school or university, they're going to need a car. At a minimum, that's a $4,000 to $6,000 a year additional cost.
Yes.
But if you're located in a multimodal community where your children don't need a car to get to school or get to university, and if the university works with the transit agency, which a lot of universities are now doing, they're providing bulk discounts for transit passes, then you're saving thousands of dollars a year. And that, for a lot of families, that's the difference between allowing their children to be able to attend university or not. It's a huge opportunity for working class families.
You know, one argument we hear from critics of our rail system here is that it won't reduce congestion. We don't have a lot of time left here on our show, but I know that you have looked at congestion impacts and the role rail transit or multimodal kind of system, as you've talked about, can play. In a minute or two, can you kind of sum up how rail can impact congestion?
Sure. Actually, the critics are wrong. They've repeated this claim frequently enough that a lot of people believe it, and it is absolutely untrue. I've done a lot of research. The results are very consistent. If you have high quality transit on a corridor, congestion delay, the intensity of congestion on parallel highways is lower. It doesn't disappear,
right,
but it's much lower than it would otherwise be. There was a recent paper published that looked at this, and it did an interesting experiment. It asked, how much does congestion increase when the transit system closes down, for example, during a strike? And they looked at Los Angeles, which is not which is a automobile-oriented community.
Yes.
Not a lot of people use transit. But even in Los Angeles, when the transit system stopped operating for a few days, congestion on the highways went up 20 or 30%. It was a huge increase in congestion because it's not total regional transit ridership that matters. It's the transit ridership on the corridors that are most congested.
Right.
And that's exactly where rail transit tends to provide high quality alternatives. And so researchers have looked at this issue from a number of ways, and the results are very consistent. High quality transit doesn't eliminate traffic congestion, but congestion is significantly lower on the corridors that have high quality transit.
Todd Littman, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
You know, on the project, we try to make it very easy for you to stay in touch. Here's a few ways you can do that. If you have a question you'd like us to answer on our next Honolulu on the Move show, go ahead and hit us up on Twitter or Facebook. Just two of the places where you can stay informed with up-to-date information on the Honolulu Rail Transit Project. And you can view our latest project videos on YouTube or Vimeo. If you'd like more information on the project or would like a presentation to your group or organization, give us a call at our project hotline at 566-2299. Or contact us via our website at honolulutransit.org. By the way, we've redesigned our project website. Visitors to honolulutransit.org will find it a more colorful, interactive, and user-friendly site. You'll be able to keep up with the latest news and information about the project, important meeting dates, times, and locations, and examine the official documents that are guiding the project's planning and construction. Take some time to visit the new and improved honolulutransit.org. And don't forget that you can also join us here every Sunday night at 4:30 p.m. on Olelo Channel 54. For all of us on the project team, mahalo for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time for another edition of Honolulu on the Move.